Now, imagine you're sitting in a cafe waiting for your brekky and you pick up the local free paper to while away the time. Scan a few ads, browse a few articles, happens all the time. But who runs these papers? Do they have ulterior motives? Well, the editors of this one certainly appear to have a heap of them.
Voice newspaper.
We are the only paper to go both sides of the river.
That's the Swan River in WA. Only 3 issues of Voice have appeared in March and April. In the suburbs around Fremantle, they've had a
Mammoth, distribution 35,000.
That is a pretty mammoth effort for a small start-up paper, which is not to be confused, by the way, with the well-established free paper The Perth Voice, published just upriver. No, the aim of Voice in Fremantle, said the editor of its first edition,
is to adopt a completely new, different and refreshing approach to local news telling and business promotion. Darley Sampson, editor.
Well, that's certainly a new and different name. Oh, sorry, it's another mammoth mistake. Over here it says
CEO and editor, Daryl Sampson.
But the newness and differentness of Voice's approach to news goes well beyond dreadful writing and lousy subbing. Take the lead story in its first edition, for example.
The continuing saga of delay and obstruction with the best laid plans of the committed developers.
Yes, that's just the headline. It's all about the proposed redevelopment of the Royal George Hotel in East Fremantle.
Local developers Terry MaGee and Andrew Cobb now say they are further bogged down with the council on matters of car parking.
This turgid yarn about heroic developers and an obstructive council goes on for more than 1,000 words. Who wrote it? We're not told. But here's a coincidence. Look up developer Terry William MaGee in ASIC's Register of Personal Names, and you'll find he's a director of a number of companies. For some of them, like
Ostasian Finance Proprietary Limited.
His address is given as
Unit 10, 79 Thompson Road, North Fremantle.
Then, if you look up Voice newspapers in the WA Register of Business Names, you find that editor and CEO Daryl Sampson's address is given as
10/79 Thompson Road, North Fremantle.
Isn't that interesting? We don't know if Mr. MaGee approved of this use of his address. We've asked him, but he hasn't responded. But here's another interesting thing about Mr. Sampson. The Voice's rival free paper, the Fremantle Herald, had a front-page story a couple of weeks ago about Voice newspapers not paying its bills. One victim was POS Displays of Sydney, which was owed $2,000 for display stands ordered by Voice's sales manager Tim Lee. POS's Kylie Moulding, reported the Herald,
said she had been ping-ponged between Mr. Lee's boss, Don Storen, and company bookkeeper Stephen Oliphant, and said she had been hung up on several times.
Now, in the first edition of Voice,
Don Storen
is listed as one of 2
contributors.
The boss should surely have been
CEO and editor Daryl Sampson.
Intrigued, the Fremantle Herald's Steve Grant discovered that Daryl Sampson had the same phone number as Don Storen.
At first, Mr. Sampson told us he and Mr. Storen shared the phone, before in a subsequent call, Mr. Storen acknowledged they were one and the same person.
How odd. So why would Don Storen want to call himself Daryl Sampson, or vice versa? Well, maybe because of this.
57-year-old Don Storen is accused of having sex with 4 underage boys at the resort he manages on the island of Lombok.
That was back in 2006. Former Adelaide businessman Don Storen was found guilty and served 4 years in an Indonesian prison. So, what have we got so far? A convicted pedophile uses a pseudonym to start up a free newspaper which then spooks the business interests of a man whose office he appears to share. But it gets even more interesting. Don Storen's co-contributor in that first edition was
Angela Oliphant,
who also handled the papers,
sales and marketing.
And on page 22, Ms. Oliphant contributed this riveting piece.
Onslow, a new source of vital energy. Angela Oliphant.
The Wheatstone natural gas project off the Pilbara coast, wrote Angela, means that
Onslow is a small fishing village with an enormous future, with development approvals being issued for short-stay apartments and a large 2-storey shopping centre.
And at the bottom of the page, we see Angela's sales and marketing skills on display.
Onslow investment opportunity. 5 sophisticated investors required at $400,000 for proposed shopping centre. 54% return to investors. Contact Angela Oliphant.
54%? Sounds too good to be true. And if you need help to take advantage of this fantastic opportunity, you can turn to
Ostasian Finance, financial solutions for critical solutions.
Just call
Angela Oliphant.
Ostasian Finance? Rings a bell, doesn't it? Oh, yes. That's the company whose director is
Terry William MaGee.
Who's trying to develop the Royal George Hotel, see page 3 of Voice, and whose address is
Unit 10, 79 Thompson Road, North Fremantle.
Which is also given by Mr. Sampson, aka Storen, editor of Voice. But what do you know? Ostasian's second director is
Angela Sarah Oliphant.
Sales and Marketing Manager of Voice. So Angela Oliphant and her husband Stephen, who is Voice's bookkeeper, seem to be right in the middle of this curious web of interests. As the Fremantle Herald has pointed out, the Oliphants and Terry MaGee have figured before in the rich history of property deals in the West.
Consultant Terry MaGee today gave evidence at the finance broker's inquiry about his role in the collapse of the Dunsborough Resort Motel project. 41 private investors lost about $1 million.
Just one of the deals investigated by the Finance Broking Royal Commission back in 2001. In his final report, Commissioner Ian Temby concluded that Terry MaGee had
behaved improperly,
though a district court judge later found he had no criminal case to answer. The bloke who valued Terry MaGee's properties back then was Stephen Oliphant. Mr. Temby concluded that
his conduct in preparing the valuations was improper.
But here's some good news. Stephen's wife, Angela, was promoted for Voice's second edition.
Editor Angela Oliphant.
Because
Darryl has had to return to his newspaper obligations in Indonesia.
Terry MaGee denied any involvement in Voice newspapers, but he did agree on the phone that, as well as being a director of Ostasian Finance, Angela Oliphant is
an editor of the paper too. So what? I can't control what directors do. I'm a director of 15 or 20 different companies. I've had no involvement with Don Storen.
We've asked Angela Oliphant and Don Storen about the multiple conflicts of interest involved in this smelly little enterprise, and received no response. Since its third edition in April, Voice seems to have fallen silent. And a good thing too. Here's my entirely unqualified advice. Steer well clear of those Onslow investment opportunities. 54% indeed. And now let's travel back to a Mediawatch programme that went to air almost 20 years ago.
Well, a short while ago I spoke to John Lombard and I asked him whether he thinks people power can triumph in the Soviet Union.
It's largely symbolic at the moment because the numbers are really quite small.
At the time, Mediawatch accused Sydney newsreader Angela Pearman and several other ABC newsreaders around the country of faking that interview with John Lombard in Moscow. The allegation was repeated in our 20th anniversary special in 2009 and was until recently available on our website. We're now satisfied that in Angela Pearman's case the allegation wasn't accurate. She had interviewed John Lombard by telephone earlier that day. Her questions and his answers were recorded simultaneously in Sydney and Moscow and later edited together. Ms. Pearman did not, as Mediawatch alleged, deceive her audience. Our belated apologies. Better, I hope, late than never. And maybe Carl Stefanovic of Nine's Today Show owes a bit of an apology to Her Majesty the Queen, and indeed to His Royal Highness Prince Philip.
The Queen has spoken of sad and regrettable mistakes at a state banquet at Dublin Castle. She was praised after opening her speech in Gaelic.
Ulterior agus a coisa.
My husband is drunk.
Hilarious. Alicia Gorry could hardly keep a straight face.
Let's check the finance figures for you now. In the US, the Dow Jones is up 80 points. Come on, Carl. On commodities markets, gold is stronger.
The Queen might not have been so amused, but heck, all she's got is a crown. Carl's got a gold logie. And talking of logies and husbands and the demon drink, who can forget this on the morning after Logie's Night 2009?
Welcome back to the show. Great to have you company. How good does Lisa Wilkinson look with zero sleep? I applaud you and I salute you and I praise you.
Sorry about that, Lisa. It was just too good to resist. That's it for tonight. Until next Monday, good night.